highfalutin presidents and others to take a seat, we'll get started here, please. All right. Appreciate everyone being present today, the day after a holiday for some, and appreciate the your presence here. Today's meeting will probably be fairly short in nature. We wanted, Chairman Garrett and I, and he'll speak in a minute, we wanted to go ahead and have a presentation by the Excel in Ed group about outcome-based funding, and we've asked them to basically give us a look nationally at the national situation and then also what various states are doing with their outcome-based funding effort, and if they had any recommendations or items like that, that they would have those for us. We also had endeavored, Chairman Garrett and I had endeavored to try to have a draft bill prepared by today for the members just to look at and start reviewing. We were not successful in that effort. We're getting close, but we're still not to a point where we want to have that circulating yet. So again, today's meeting will probably be fairly brief and an hour or less. And then if you've got questions, we certainly want to try to work through those. Some we may have to get answers for. Before I turn it over, I would say this, our objective is to try to help our colleges and universities in the days and years ahead with this effort, similar, certainly not the same as our RAISE Act that we did for K-12, and use resources, presumably from the Education Opportunity Fund, to do that with, and challenge our institutions to raise their bars and help them financially to get there. And hopefully the better outcomes will be our state will be improved, our state will grow, and the products coming out of our universities will be able to contribute to the future growth and success of our state. So that being said, Chairman Garrett, I'm sure you've got more profound words of wisdom for us today.
I'm not sure they're profound or wise, but I'll just say that thank you for being here today for the meeting. Everything he said, I would agree with 100%. In my getting ready for the budget next year, I'm hearing from a lot of school superintendents, school board members, school principals, whatnot, and everything I'm hearing very positive comments about two things. One is the cell phone bill, the fact that we've eliminated that out of schools, that's huge. And the second thing is the RAISE Act and the fact that people have money on top of the foundation program to do some things they need to do. And I've not heard one negative. In fact, it's all been overwhelmingly positive. But that RAISE Act came to be in the same kind of process we're doing right now. We started a process where we had discussions, candid discussions, public discussions, and some people got ahead of us and tried to speculate what we were doing, not doing, all that kind of stuff. We ended up with a bill, again, that everybody's happy with. And so what we're doing right now, we're drafting something for our members to look at. There'll be a lot more discussion. It's just like that process. There'll be discussions with the higher ed community. But we're in a process. So I'll just encourage people. I'm already hearing rumblings of people getting out ahead of the skis and speculating what we're doing and what we're not doing. We're going to do this program, if we do it, just like we did the RAISE Act, go into a process, and that resulted, I think, in a very successful result. So we're being open and candid, and we have no predetermined ideas, but everybody will have discussion at the appropriate time. Thank you.
I think just to follow up on Chairman Garrett, he said if we do it, and that's always a possibility. If I recall correctly, I think that was a possibility with the RAISE Act, that there was a question of if we do it. The second is to flesh it out a little bit more. I would see this as being collaborative with our higher education institutions. They're not all the same. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just they're not all the same and can't be treated all the same. So it won't be a one-size-fits-all. It'll be more of an institution-by-institution approach, and that will take time, and that'll take dialogue. What I think Chairman Garrett and I, and he can dispute me if he would like, we do desire and take seriously your participation and your communication. If there's a lack of communication and a lack of desire to participate and have those conversations, then that certainly will be so noted as well. So we do want to talk with you and work with you. And again, I think we all have the same goal here, which is to produce better outcomes for our state and help our state grow in the process. So that being said, we will start with our Excel and Ed folks who have come into town. We have Miss Miranda Williams and Matthew Joseph with us this morning that will discuss the slide deck that I think members have a copy of at their seat. Before you start, Ms. Williams, I also distributed an article I thought I saw in the paper just the other day about grade inflation. I thought that was interesting, and how grade inflation is such a problem in our country and what it means. And that's just for your edification as interested members in higher education. Thought if you didn't catch that article, it might be worth 5 minutes of your reading time. So that being said, Ms. Williams, you have the microphone.
Hi there. Well, thank you, Chairman Orr and Chairman Garrett, for having us here today. It's a treat to be in the great state of Alabama. I am Miranda Thomas. I got married over the summer, so I was Miranda Williams, and now I'm Miranda Thomas. But I am with Excel and Ed, and Excel and Ed is an education organization that was started and founded by Governor Jeb Bush after his term in Florida as governor. And Excel and Ed has now grown to a national organization where we work with a number of states, 30 plus, to advance strong student-centered education policy. We really focus on the bread and butter of education policy. We want to make real impact in classrooms and universities across your state. So we work on math, literacy, teacher policy, college and career pathways, accountability, charter schools, and cell phone-free schools, where Chairman Garrett gave a shout out to Alabama's great bill from last session. And we also work on school funding reform, and that's why we're here today. So speaking of school funding reform, Alabama is making very impressive strides with policies like the RAISE Act. However, there is a significant opportunity to build on that success by implementing outcomes-based funding in higher education. Other southern and southeastern states like Kentucky, Tennessee, and Texas have already adopted these transformative measures. And we're hopeful that Alabama will also take this step to drive better results for students in the state. And this is a practical, achievable policy that can make a real impact. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Matthew Joseph, my colleague. He is our policy expert on education funding reform. Matthew brings over a decade of experience with our organization and has partnered with dozens of states to modernize their education funding systems. He is always focused on helping states maximize the impact of the resources they have. So thank you again for having us. And Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Miranda. And thank you so much for the opportunity. Am I getting picked up? Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. At Excel and Ed, we've been looking a lot about what states have been doing in outcomes-based funding to kind of understand what are the best practices, what are they learning, and we've been trying to understand what the national landscape is. And I just applaud this committee for being having a thoughtful process. We've been hearing about your meetings, and you've been bringing in national experts. And what we have to say is very consistent with what you've already heard, about what states are learning and what they find to be critical ingredients. And I wanted to share just kind of what the basic findings findings are from these states, and then just to talk a little bit how Alabama currently compares to where they are and what the kind of steps it would take to get Alabama to the stage where these other states are, which is, as Miranda said, very doable and achievable for the state. Outcomes-based funding for higher education is not new. It's been happening for decades. The vast majority of states are using it. But what happened over the last decade is some states started to take a really close look at where are we actually seeing impact, and what do we need to do to fine-tune our system so that we're getting the best benefit from these systems. And Kentucky, for example, really took a close look at what they were doing, and they modernized their outcomes-based funding, and they saw an immediate impact. I mean, if you take a look at their graduation rates over the last 10 years, what you see is that their growth had just stalled. It just wasn't improving very much. And then they fine-tuned, they upgraded their outcomes-based funding, and they saw a significant boost in their graduation rates, a 50% higher change from year to year over the last 5 years. And similarly, in Texas and Tennessee, they have also taken a look at what was necessary, and they've also changed their outcome-based funding. And they really have found that there's three most important components that they have found. First of all, that outcomes-based funding works. It is a great carrot. I mean, you all have lots of devices to maybe hold accountable and sticks, but this is proven to be a great use as a carrot to incentivize the kind of change that you want. What the states have found is this is extremely cost effective, because anything that a state is spending is based on student success. If student success goes up, then the money goes up, and that's viewed as an extremely high return on investment for the state. It also basically...
Matthew, let me,
yes.
And members, if you got a question, you can stop. So going back to Kentucky.
Yes.
You said graduation rates over the last 5 years increased 50%, correct?
Well, the rate of change went up by 50%.
Okay.
Yes.
So what else did Kentucky, is that the only thing Kentucky focused on, or were there other items that you know, or was it?
You know, I mean, Kentucky, all the states are making a lot of different changes. I do think that a lot of people point to, I mean, this is like a point in time. There was a new system put in place for a specific fiscal year, and so you can do a before and after, you know, to see the difference.
Okay, but as far as a laundry list of other items that the Kentucky legislature or governor wanted to see improvement on, you're not sure if there were other markers or indicators that they wanted to improve on?
You know, that's something I can definitely follow up with you on to see. You know, I do think that, that this is something that, you know, whether you can establish perfect causation, I think most people do see that this change, you know, took place in a certain point in time. Even the talking about this, honestly, improved changes from the institutional level in terms of a boost in graduation rates. So, you know, I think that most people think of it as this is the primary reason why it would have taken place in Kentucky.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. And please, obviously, any questions,
if
interrupt
members
me.
got questions, you know, feel free. We want to be informal today.
I just wanted to kind of finalize just like what these states have found from the positive, which is also about just the flexibility that is being given to the institutions to basically, we're focusing on outcomes, therefore we're giving you more flexibility on how you use your resources, but we're holding you accountable for results. And so that's been a really important thing in these states. It's a shift from the policymaker level to the outcomes, and not about like utility costs and not about ratios of staff and all the kind of inputs, to really about like what really matters, what do we expect these institutions to do, and how can we make sure there's a good strategy to make for improvement, as opposed to all the micro details. So in terms of those three components, that what they really found, like what is helping us make this growth? What does it really take for a successful outcome-based funding system? What they found were three main things. The first is you have to be offering a meaningful amount of money. The researchers have gone in sometimes where they don't see the impact, and they ask people, well, why didn't this have any impact? And they say, well, what you were offering was less than 1% of my budget. And it's very hard to make changes to do the things you want. And less than 1%, you know, that's just not enough really to really incentivize the changes. So I think people have learned from that. These states that we're talking about, Kentucky, their outcomes-based funding in Kentucky is 35% of the budgets, If you talk about the state and local, not even including tuition, it's 35%. In Tennessee, it's 40% for the community colleges. It's 70% for the 4 years. In Texas, it's almost 30% of their budgets. And just want to say, like, what states are doing is they're saying, well, if we want to have a meaningful amount and our state portion is only a small portion of the budget, like in Texas, the community colleges are predominantly funded by local dollars. 80% of the money comes local dollars. So the state legislature said, well, then we're going to take 100% of the state dollars, 100%, and we're going to link it to outcomes. So overall, they're trying to say the overall budget, when you take a look at an institution, it should be about a certain meaningful portion of the overall budget. And if the state portion is a bigger or smaller, you kind of calibrate it to say, well, if the state budget portion of it is smaller, then we want to have a higher amount of it attached to outcomes funding, because we want to make sure overall it's meaningful enough to incentivize change. And by the way, when I say a meaningful amount, I mean you can set a high bar for what you expect and what the amount is, but that doesn't mean that's what your budget is, because you never have 100% of students successful. It's going to be starting much lower than that. And then usually, like in Texas, they said, well, if 100% of students are successful, here's where the budget is, but where it really is much lower. And they said, honestly, this is one part of the budget they would be happy if they saw growth. If they saw an additional $5 million, they would say, this means that this is because of more student success. That the only way this goes out is if there's more student success. And so they're kind of happy to see that grow. But what you want to offer is enough of a bonus to basically make it meaningful for the institutions. The second thing they found, after the amount of money being enough, is that you have to have the right targets, the right outcomes. What's the goal? And what they have found is that...
Is this the next slide in the slide deck?
I mean, I'm going to be getting to it when I get to Alabama.
Oh, okay. All right.
But yeah, I'm talking a lot over...
Slides.
I only have 3 slides, in case you're wondering. Okay. I'm not going to take 20 minutes per slide.
Okay.
But that's hard. Because I wanted to get to Alabama and how it fits into this really fast. So I appreciate that. I'll move along. But the outcomes, what's the target? You're creating this pressure. There's enough money being offered, but what are you offering it for? And what they have found is that simple and focused is key. States that have had like 83 different kinds of outcomes, and each one of them has its own measure, and there's all this math behind the measure that involves calculus or something like that, that really it has resulted in limited change, because institutions are frozen in place. There's just so many different directions. And also that meaningful amount that you offered is now being fragmented into tiny little pieces. And so to each little one that I do, you're really offering me a really insignificant amount of money, and therefore I'm not going to do anything. And that's what's really happened. So what they have said is we are going to focus on what do we care about the most. And what they have said they care most about is how well are students doing after they leave. I mean, are they successful? Are they really successful? When they leave the institution, if they want to have a job, do they actually get a job? Does that job pay the minimum wage? Does it pay a little better than the minimum wage? If their goal is to go to another education institution, do they actually transfer to another education institution? Or do they enlist in the military? So for example, in Tennessee, the bonuses are, do you get a job do you have full-time employment afterwards? Or do you transfer to another institution? In Texas, it's the same thing, transferring to a 4-year institution successfully. And actually for the technical colleges in Texas, it's the wages. 100% of their money from the state is based on the wages 5 years after completion of their graduates. And they have been doing this for a decade, by the way, or more. And we've had them come to our summit, for example. There's no crazy budget instability. They know how to predict. They know what's coming down the pike for them. And they have been able to survive and thrive through a formula which is 100% based on the wages of their graduates. The last thing I think that they have found that's really important, in addition to the right targets, the right amount of money, enough money, the right targets, is they have to adjust and take into account that certain students have higher needs. And what they want to make sure is that there's no incentive and no reward for an institution to say, well, I can improve my outcomes by excluding certain types of students. I can exclude an adult learner. I can exclude someone who comes in underprepared. I can exclude somebody who is a low-income student, a Pell eligible student. And they don't want to have unintended consequences. They want to make sure that these institutions feel rewarded if they take on and admit those students that they know are going to require a little bit of effort. And so what they do is they make the bonuses substantially higher. They don't lower the standards for those students. They don't say those students can be successful without a job, or not go to, they still want to have the same bar for those students, but they want to say the bonus for success with that student is going to be, for example, in Tennessee, it's 80% more. In Texas, it's 50% more. So it's really adjusting those three things, because without that third thing, what you would see if you ran the numbers is that basically the institutions that have the most advantaged populations would get the most money. But if you do the adjustment, if you say the 80%, what you would see, no, it's an equal thing. There may be fewer students that are eligible in certain institutions, but the amount they're getting per student is higher because they have more of those students that are in that category. And so it's an equalizer.
Matthew, let me
Sure.
pause there. We got questions down here.
Thank you.
Senator Albritton?
I don't have necessarily a question, but I have a comment, if I may.
Sure.
I've got 4 grandchildren who in the last 3 years have graduated from high school in Kentucky. And I was impressed with how they have gone through. We're in different counties and different parts of the state of Kentucky. But one of them is graduating from another college out of Kentucky, but she's graduating because of the Kentucky education at age 20 within the next 3 weeks with a 4-year degree in zoology. Now, I don't know how many of you are impressed with that, but I'm kind of impressed with that. I've got, and the other
grandfather you're supposed to be.
well, yeah, that's what she told me. And then I've got the other 3, I was impressed with the matters of how they went through. They had time in their high school years, not only to go to college, which we have the dual enrollment pattern, but they were also encouraged and given time to work. And they had not full-time jobs, but they had part-time jobs and reported and had to deal with that too. But all of them are now approaching graduation in a much shorter time frame in substantial. One is graduating with a double major in economics and something else. Okay, it wasn't zoology. My point is, Kentucky seems to be doing something right, because if you look at the genetics, it wasn't the brain power that came along, but it was certainly a matter of that they started doing something differently at that point, and it seems to be making a difference. So I'll leave that alone.
Yeah, I might just echo that. I think those are really valid comments. And again, I don't have a conclusion here, but I've met already in anticipation of next year's budget with several university presidents, and I've asked several of them the same question, and that is that in this changing world we're in, and I look at, certain fields right now, entrepreneurial fields that don't require college degrees. You have dual enrollment, you have virtual schools, you got all this kind of stuff going on here. Why does it take 4 years to graduate? And why is that the model? That's been the model, I understand it. But I think as part of this discussion, we ought to look at, and maybe that's part of the outcomes, I don't know, but I'm just saying that why should it take 4 years to get somebody into the field they want to be into the workforce in the state where they want to be? That's just an idea. So that kind of goes along with what he's saying, and I think that's something we ought to talk about.
Well, first of all, congratulations on being on your grandchildren. I think you both are absolutely saying what these states have experienced, which is, in addition to rewarding the kind of post-graduation success, they want to basically make sure they're incentivizing good program completion, at least get the program finished. Students, you don't want to have them drop out. So what they're doing is they are having part of the outcomes-based funding to be talking about, are you graduating your students? Are they completing their programs? And are they, and two things they are considering is, are they doing it in a faster way, the way you're talking about? And also, was it in a what they consider to be a high-value program? Is this a program that is aligned with an occupation that's likely to be in demand in this state? And I know this is an area that Alabama's already been doing work on, that in-demand space. So I think that's part of your system is, in addition to the ultimate goal is, did they get a job? Is it paying a reasonable amount? Is, did you get them to at least the finish line of your program properly? I think that the reason why we also are, and these things are thinking about post, because you just don't want to have a sense that an institution is saying, once you finish, we don't care about you anymore. Because I think that if they decided that maybe it's going to be effective for them to have a few extra counselors to help with that process, to stick with them for a few extra months after they leave, to make sure they're transitioning well to that job, that they don't have extra needs, they're transitioning well to that next higher education. You see a much bigger boost with that not just a drop off, but a handoff, a transition, collaboration between institutions that are at the different levels of a student's life. And that even includes employment. I think that's very successful, and it's a great point.
Matthew.
Yes.
Question, 5 years post-graduation and you're measuring salaries of graduates? Is that what you said?
That's what Texas is doing with all of its technical colleges, yes.
How are they getting that data?
Well, they have quite a great data collection system in Texas. I mean, it's a big state. A lot of the people are staying in state, so they use unemployment records. I mean, they're able to do that. I'm not suggesting that's something Alabama has to do. I'm telling you that if someone tells you it's impossible to do.
It's a metric.
Yeah. But you could wait. Like, I think, our thinking is, well, how long should you wait? And we would think, like, maybe you should wait 6 months after completion. Let's just wait to see whether or not they actually stay enrolled or stay employed. If you could just wait just a little bit post-graduation, not 5 years like Texas did, but if you waited even 6 months to make sure the transition's working, then that's not that big a lag to wait for the incentive money. Just to make sure, because I think there's no question that the states have found that you can use proxies. Like, did they pass an exam? What their GPA is? Did they actually graduate? Those are really good proxies, but they're not the same as actual success. So the closer you can get to actually rewarding actual success, then you don't have to think about how good a predictor is this thing. You say, well, I don't know what the right predictor is. I just know that at the end of the day, like, I want your graduates basically to hit a certain bar. And so I think that those are really all really good questions. So we did recently, as part of our work on pathways, we did assess 20 states. Where do they stand on a whole host of measures, 45 different measures, but some of them were about outcome-based funding. And this is going to be coming out at our summit in a week. And I was told, by the chairs, it's okay to say that where Alabama really stands on this, so that you're not disappointed. But we found that we have our ratings, and that Alabama really does have quite a lot of room for improvement on this. We looked at these 3 buckets. Is there enough money being offered currently? And we looked at in Alabama, it's less than 1%, of the budget. So, I mentioned how high it is in these other states, that it's less than 1%. So that's an issue. And then in terms of the outcomes, none of the outcomes are about that post-graduation level. And even the ones that are about, like, program completion, there's nothing about, like, is this going to relate to an in-demand occupation in the state? What's really happening? Is this something that's going to lead someone to make it likely that they will be successful post-graduation? Oops.
Whoever's online, please mute yourself. Please.
I thought I was doing something. It's a signal from
or
Miranda.
Mute yourself, one of the two.
And then, this really important third prong, which is, are you doing the adjustments for the higher need students? We didn't find that. So right now, I think that Alabama, when we have our rating scales of red, yellow, and green, whereas these other states are going to be in the green category, the L category, Alabama right now is going to be a red. But when I look to see, like, that may be disappointing, but I look to see what would it take to go higher than that. It's very achievable for Alabama, because if you take some of the basic lessons that these other states have done and you try to apply it in your context, it seems like it's something that it's not going to Mars or something like that. It's something that it's very achievable because other states have done it. Other states in your region are doing it, and they have had success. I mean, you know, I saw that if you take a look at the 2- and 4-year institutions in Alabama and how much state and local money are they getting per student on average, it's about $12,000. So if you're in that 5 to 10%, you know, a meaningful amount, you know, that's what we said, a meaningful amount of 5 to 10%, that's a very realistic, because that's not your budgeted amount. I just want to make it clear that that would be if 100% of your students are hitting the bar, which is not realistic for any state. That would mean that you set the bar too low. So if it's like 50% initially, and you do the math, you know, it's a very realistic amount of money. It's like in the $30 to $40 million a year budget. I'm just saying that approximately. You guys will have to run your own numbers, but I just want to say, like, no one's talking about this is like $1 billion thing or something like that. It's a very realistic amount of money that can come on top of what their institutions are already getting, and you would see impact from that. You know, I think how you divide out your money, I mean, it's very clear. States are just saying, well, there's a proportional amount based on the way you normally distribute your revenue, and we're not going to let one institution like grab 100% of the pool that's available. We're going to make sure everyone has their amount that they can get, and then they can get up to that amount. If they got 100% success, they would get their full amount, you know. But mostly they're going to be, you know, starting at the 50%. So they're going to grow and grow and grow each year. In terms of the outcomes, you know, I think that it was a great question of where to get the data. And, you know, I think that initially, I mean, I definitely think the goal should be that the biggest reward should be for the indicators, the outcomes that you think are most important: the employment, the enrollment, the enlistment. You know, what does that really have that be? Even if you don't have the data always there yet, you can fold it in and say, well, within a year of phasing this in, you know, let's get the data.
Let me ask you a question. So you said the graduation success,
Yes.
and take that employment part. What would you do in a situation of increasing unemployment in a bad economy, or what? I mean, do you penalize schools because their graduates can't find a job, but the job market is very challenging and uphill, and you know, not a lot of jobs available? That doesn't sound like it's a fair deal for the institution. When you have that problem of 8% unemployment or whatever, what would we do in that kind of situation?
I mean, you can definitely like factor that in when you do your draft bill, but also I think that this is an exact reason why you don't want to hard code everything into your statute. You want to have a process where some council of business leaders and institution leaders and students and parents are looking at this and giving you all recommendations on adjustments each year and say, look where the economy is heading. We need to make certain adjustments. Some of that you could build in and say, well, if the employment goes above a certain percent or something like that. And those are things that I could get back to you about. Like, is there a best way to do that? You're always asking great questions. But I do feel like other states are saying that's not an insurmountable object to having outcomes-based funding.
Well, again, in my mind, to kind of go along with that, you know, we've just created a Department of Workforce. We have the lowest labor participation rate in the country, and so we're trying to focus on connecting with the business community and with the consumer there to find out what really our job need to be. I think the universities need to be part of that program, part of that process. But also, I want to say that, well, I lost my train of thought. You asked about it needs to be dynamic, because we hear all the time presenters say that we're graduating students, we're training people for jobs that aren't even in existence right now. So as that evolves and emerges, that's going to be continuous, and the workforce department hopefully is going to respond to that and say, here's the jobs we need. I think that's got to be part of what we're doing. In other words, today we need this. Mm-hmm. In 10 years, we might need something else. So it's got to be fluid, I think. And I don't know how you do that, but I think it's got to be part of it. It's a dynamic model we're talking about that's going to change. And the other thing, too, is I think the fact is, you know, we need people to stay in state. We have too many people leaving the state, and that's not helping our situation.
Right. Those are great points. I think that, you know.
Excuse me, Representative Ellis.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things. One, I'm glad to see the higher needs students portion of that, because that was one of my bigger concerns. I would like to ask, do other states that we're comparing ourselves to, do they consider how many students are there with registered disabilities, because I know a lot of our smaller regional universities have a higher percentage of students with disabilities. And so I'd like that. Follow-up question is, do any of the other states consider online classes versus in-person class when they're looking at graduation rates?
Yeah. In terms of your first question, I think that these are the most common ones, the academically underprepared, adult learners, first generation, low income. I have seen disability. I guess the question that we have is like, what's the definition of it? Like in K to 12, because we've done a lot of work in K to 12 performance funding, you have like clearly someone could have an IEP, there's a federal law, IDEA, are they eligible, do they have a 504 plan? The question would be at higher ed, what would be the same standard? Because you don't want to have it be so flexible that an institution can just say, well, all our students, do it, to get the extra. It has to be something that's not that you can't manipulate. So I think that's something that, again, if that's something of interest, I think that's something that we can get back to. That would be the question. I don't know if you already have a thought, or maybe the institutions will have a thought about like, what's the definition of being disabled? That's kind of be fixed. Because you can see these other ones, adult learners, that could be 25 or older. First generation is defined. You use that in your statute already, first generation. Pell Grant, these are the kind of things that I hope I'm being clear. It's not the idea is bad. In K to 12, we absolutely say that students with disabilities should be one of those categories. And if Alabama can figure a way to make it so that there's a way to define those students in higher education, then that's something to include. And then in terms of the virtual versus non-virtual, I think that, I guess I wonder, like, does it matter? Like, if it's the same bar, does your person who graduates that program, are they employed at a certain wage? Then do we really care? I mean, I think this is what the philosophy outcomes-based funding is, that we're not going to tell an institution how to do these things. We just don't know what like the chair is saying, it's so dynamic. This is exactly why you have outcomes-based funding, because we just don't know the fluidity of the situation. That's why we want to have the institutions be as flexible on the structures and what they do, but you're going to hold them accountable for what you care about and what the taxpayer cares about. So I don't know, is there something specific about the virtuals that you think already that you would want to have distinguished in terms of what happens?
Not necessarily, but I just know that a lot of our universities have a real high percentage of online, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I just didn't know if other states were taking that into consideration. And if we're looking at the universities individually, that's fine, but if we're comparing them across the board, to other universities, we just need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
I mean, I know that certainly, there's a lot of adjustments on the base budget. They say, well, it costs less. So, but this is not even focusing on the base budget. This is all on top of that.
So I'm going to oversimplify to this point. I mean, I think what I was trying to make earlier was we have this box that we say, in all education, from the K-12 to, here's the box you got to fit into. And I think we're talking in a world today where we've got to have customization, flexibility, choice, changing. We're dynamic. It's a dynamic world. So in my mind, we need to focus more on the outcomes than protecting or adapting what's being done there. So for example, and this is oversimplifying, but if a person can do online work and get out of school faster into the job market, and that's more cost effective for them, they don't have to borrow student loan, why not? I mean, I don't really care. I guess as long as you achieve the outcome, and I'm interested in graduation rates, but I want them to be graduation rates that are legitimate and that are in jobs we need. They're high demand jobs. Yeah. And if we're going to graduate teachers, we want those teachers to be able to pass the praxis. Right. We want nursing students who graduate to be able to pass the nursing. I mean, so it's got to be, to me, the focus being the end result, the outcome. And how you get there, I think it's up to the institution. That's in my mind. That's kind of oversimplifying, but I don't think we're locked into any way we're doing it right now. And it would require change. But again, a lot of these people are going to work and making six figures without any degree at all, because they can code or they can do something in the tech world. So,
right. Well, you've clearly looked at the experience of other states. I can't say any better.
Senator Figures, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know, should Alabama decide to do this, how does Excel in Ed fit into this? Do we do a contract with you, or
No, I mean, we are not a state, we don't accept public dollars. We are philanthropically funded. We are people who advise and share best practices with the state. And, we oftentimes do care about implementation. I mean, implementation does matter. I can tell you about some of the experiences. Post-passage of the law, there are some things that are necessary to help make it happen. And so we're always to help advise, but we're not here to kind of, request money or, be involved more than you ever feel would be helpful to you, honestly. That's our job, is that we do across 30 or 40 states, like Miranda said, on a whole host of issues. But I'm hopefully that you'll say at some point that we've just been helpful to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Collins.
Sorry, stuck in traffic late, but glad to be here. In response to Senator Figure's questions and concerns too, I know there was a time back in 2012 that the state was offering to pay, as we had just passed the A through F report card, and there were many years I wish we had just paid and moved forward faster than we did. But no, I appreciate your attention to implementation and helping us along the way. I found that to be helpful with everything I've worked on, so I want to say thank you for that. And as far as the higher need and the different things we're looking at, I think if we start doing some outcome-based funding based on the outcomes that we're needing, that's really the focus that we have. That's my thought on that. Thank you.
One thing just to also add on to what you said, Chair Garrett, is that on the completion measure, where we say like higher value, that's the kind of thing that needs to be updated on a yearly basis. What are those in-demand occupations? What are the things you as policymakers want to say? If you graduate someone in this type of area, this is going to get a 50% higher bonus, something like that, because you definitely want to distinguish between the programs that you feel are likely because of their nature, like nursing is more likely because it's nursing versus another type of program. But then actually also reward the literal success of that student, because the higher value is not really about the success with an institution's actual students. It's more predicting based on the type of program that it's nursing. It's more likely to lead to a job that pays better. So it's really the two in combination. But the higher value one is something that usually what states are doing is on a yearly basis. They're looking at the data. They're saying, this is no longer an in demand. It was demand last year. They are trying to project into the future. And that's the hardest part. And that's why I say that ultimately, it's less about trying to think about the past, and it is just letting the institutions themselves have the data to think about the future. And how do they use AI? And how do they think about the way the economy is changing? But to say, but this is the bar. You have to help your students get a job. You have to help them succeed at the next level of their education.
Following up on that, so one of the concerns I would have is being almost too flexible, because if I'm on the institution side, and I believe this is where we need to head with, certain skill sets and graduates in these particular programs. You mentioned nursing, and then you said, but maybe we filled that or we don't have that need and we go over here. But I've now committed a lot of resources at my institution, setting up a school of nursing or nursing department, whatever, to fill this need. Now I've got to do an audible, as they say, and go over here, and there's a new something, computer coders, that I've got to go chase. I get a little fearful of whipsawing institutions around with carrots, and how to you grasp my question? I mean, how do we be more deliberative and thoughtful and not entrenched so much, but then again, not just follow the bouncing ball, so to speak, and trying to grab something and chasing the wind?
Right. Great question. So of course, the core outcomes, are you employed, at a certain wage? That's not going to change. I mean, the core part of your outcomes-based funding is going to be stable unless you have to have that provision. We've had a catastrophic economic situation in the state. That's the part that's kind of stable. And I do agree absolutely that when they've interviewed institutional leaders about why did they not respond to certain things, they said it's because I didn't know whether the money was going to be there. it was changing every year, and so they're asking you to make all this hard effort to change, but I'm not going to do it unless I feel assured that that money is going to be there. So I think that core part is not going to change, and what that means is that they need to know that whatever you're putting in the budget, each year, I mean, you may not be obligating it year after year, but they need to know that there's a commitment to kind of say that if it's $30 million, it's going to be $30 million, and that we're not going to find out we did all the hard work and it just gets evaporated, just not because of a budget pressure, but just because of a change of desire. Because you are asking a lot. I think in terms of the higher value occupations, they're not likely to change dramatically from year to year. Like one year the state needs nurses and the next year it doesn't. But of course you can phase it in. I mean, you can use rolling averages, but I mean that's what they do. You use rolling averages of what the kind of anticipated are these. This is something that the workforce department can be doing, it's helping figure out what are those in-demand wages, in-demand occupations, and are they going to change, and give people a little bit of a heads up and figure out. I feel like that's very specific to implementation and your design. It certainly doesn't mean that it's a flawed concept. It's something that states can figure out how to do, that there's not a whipsawing back and forth or something erratic.
President Stubbs.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment regarding that. I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of our colleges and universities specialize in certain areas, and I don't know that we want to have every college and university focusing in one specific area. Some are very good at nursing, others are very good at political science, some are very good at agriculture, and so it would behoove us to emphasize their strengths rather than try to put all of them in one specific area. And so as we continue to develop this concept, if we can find a way to be loose enough that we allow them to be themselves as a college or university based on their diversity in population and geography and everything else, I think that would long-term be better than hoping that a school that maybe doesn't currently have a strong nursing program, but they do have a strong agricultural program, let's reward them for being strong in that area that they currently are, assuming the fact that the global economy hasn't changed so much that they're obsolete. But as we consider this, I think we need to emphasize the diversity and the strengths of our colleges and universities rather than conform to what someone might tell us to do.
So I would agree with that concept. And one thing I want to say, just again, we don't have specifics, but just conceptually, we're talking about money in addition to what colleges are getting now under the regular formula. So similar to the RAISE Act where we had additional funding, this is additional pocket here. I think that that's a good point. What you talked about, we're not trying to force everybody to do the same thing. I think we've got to look at there'll be discussions with each institution about what their metrics should be and what their goals should be and those things like that. And also, I don't think we've said it yet, or maybe we have, but we have some research institutions that are going to be incented differently. Because we need to have, they're not going to be, so we have to acknowledge those differences in their missions, their differences in their demographics and whatnot. But ultimately, whatever those differences are, need to be aligned with the statewide strategy and what our statewide needs are.
Great points.
Senator Roberts?
This is where I think working closely with Secretary Reed and our workforce allows for great conversations with how we can, places we need to incent, and put that out there. So I'm seeing ACCS do this all over the state, particularly in my area. I see it happen where they're coming on helping meet workforce needs. But I think having this department working together with us opens up all types of opportunities. And this can be a great driver for what we see coming down the road as well.
It feels like you're at the perfect time to be thinking about this, given that you get to learn from what these other states have done, the changes that are taking place in technology, how fast they are moving, merits a shift to outcomes, and then the underemployment in the state, all the things that you're talking about. gives me so much hope that Alabama's ready to go up to that level, close to these other states. And, we're looking forward to being helpful to you along the way, and hope that you'll reach out to us if we can do more research for you, connect you with people in other states, learn a little bit more about what they're doing, so you can realize that this is not jumping off a cliff. This is doing something that states have been doing, and they have been perfecting and evolving over time, and that this is something that another state like Alabama, with the resources you have and the needs that you have, really can just leapfrog quite a bit in terms of where you are now to where you can be even in a few years. So I hope that you'll continue to reach out to me and Miranda if we can be helpful, and just really thank you so much for your time and your great questions and your thoughtfulness about this.
Any other questions from the committee? Any comments from the committee? All right, as predicted, we're a little bit under an hour. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, and I appreciate your being here, and Ms. Thomas, we appreciate your being here as well. As you said, I think we have Chairman Garrett, the attitude that we had with the RAISE Act to be slow and deliberate and not get ahead of ourselves and be somewhat rash with decisions, and predict our decisions, work with our institutions. They are all different, and make sure that we do what's best for the state, not just hustle up some kind of concept that just because we want to hustle it up and pass a bill. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but we can do better. And I think we see other states taking this issue on around the country and improving their outputs, and that would certainly be our goal here in Alabama to do likewise, again, with all slow and deliberate speed. Chairman Garrett, you got any parting wisdom for us?
No, I think this is good information. Again, we'll be having discussions with universities, and just like we encourage the school systems, universities are kind of the think tanks for the future. You've got a lot of bright minds there. We welcome your thoughts on how we can come up and develop outcomes that are appropriate for what we have, as we've been talking about. And I think the deliberate part of this, we're probably not going to have a list of 20 outcomes that we're going to be looking, stepping into this slowly and measuring it, making sure that it's targeted and it's constructive and it's working. But we welcome your thoughts on some of these things ideas we floated this morning, and again, we're part of a process. No decisions at this point.
I had one other, Mr. Joseph. I don't know. Across the country, can you give us the most common features of the outcome-based funding plans in the various states? We've heard about graduation, I assume retention, the salaries that the graduates get, are they high? Of course, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, like educators, unfortunately, may not qualify in a high salaried outcome, but that's certainly something that we want. First generation we discussed, poverty we discussed, adult learners, coming back to school, can we help? You've heard the figure here in Alabama. We have 500,000 people with some college living here in our state that need to hopefully finish a 2-year or 4-year degree in our state. And any others that are kind of in the usual suspects of outcomes that we see across the country?
Before you answer, let me just ask you, since we're the worst, have the lowest labor participation rate, does anybody else in-state retention in-state?
Yeah, I actually have seen that. I can't remember which state it is, but I have seen that for sure. In terms of the employment, that's where you would kind of put that in there. You might say employment in-state. That as an economic development, because if they could prove that they were out of state and making a good salary, that might be okay also, But I think in terms of the employment, what typically they're doing is it's a percent of the state median wage, and they calibrate it depending upon, is this person just finished a technical degree that took them 3 months, or is it an associate's degree or a 4-year degree? The expectations of salary would be higher than that because, they spent 4 years in college, and so you would anticipate that they would have a higher wage. So, we take a look at it, and also just, Chair, where you said, so let's say it was 70% for someone who finished a technical, 70% of the state median wage, and 80% if it was a 2-year, and 90% for bachelors. If there was any category of employment that you felt didn't meet that but was a state priority, you just put that in you say, plus any job that's a state priority. So if you felt like teachers were going to fall below the 80 or 90%, then you would just have that as a category. You could just say teachers, so they're not excluded. I looked at nursing. Nursing in this state would be well above that, but I see that in education, that's something to do with the math. Would they really hit the 80% or the 90% bar? But that would be the most common. Other than that, of course, enlistment. There's a challenge of getting this information out of the Department of Defense, by the way. I think Texas has been trying for a while. So, you have to figure, but I think, we don't want to say enlistment is not an acceptable outcome because it absolutely is an acceptable outcome. But I think you talked about it, all those categories of higher needs, these are the most common ones. And then in terms of the postgraduate success, employment, enrollment, enlistment, and sometimes in enrollment, they say transfer to a 4-year, and sometimes they want to know, like, what happened to them? They transferred, but did they need remediation? Did they fail out in their first semester? So there's a question of, do you want to push it to the 6-month mark and just see whether or not they actually weren't just dumped into a 4-year institution, they weren't prepared? That's a question for how long you want to wait and how you can get the data. And that's why I feel like you can always start at one level and just have this evolution of always improvement and just say, we want to get this data. And once we get this data, we're going to use it. But right now, we're going to use the best data we've got. So we don't really have employment outside of Alabama, for example. So we're going to use employment inside of Alabama. The data that you have, your various departments will have, and they can tell you. And then you can have a culture of improving the data so that you can have more of it for the outcomes that you care about the most.
I keep beating this drum about the in-state, but I guess it's a chicken and egg thing because we can't, they can't stay in-state if we don't have the jobs. And so I think that's where it's got to be aligned with the Department of Workforce and the economic development efforts and the business expansions, things like that, so that we can provide the workforce. One, but not, we can, maybe we can't attract businesses here or expansions here because we don't have a workforce. Yeah. So it's kind of a deal where you've got to be aligned. But I think that's important and unique to our state because it's so, we export students. Yeah. And we need to develop that workforce somehow. So I think that's a part of the element, but I'm not sure how you address it.
Well, one of the things I just feel like I'm hearing is such amazing, honestly, is the big picture that you're thinking about, how it cuts across all these different elements. And this is one of the reasons, this is one of the benefits that states are finding when they shift their mentality to the outcomes part of funding, which is we've shifted, now we get to think about strategy. Well, how do we get these agencies to work together? What is our overarching strategy? Let's not get caught up every day in the intricacies of funding formulas and class size and this and the other. Let's think about what are agencies working well together? Are they collaborating? Do they have a plan? Is it aligned with the way they spend their money? These are the big questions that you get to ask if you're not stuck in the minutia year after year. And I just think that really is what's going to ultimately help the students and the employers in your state.
Well, thank you very much for the good information today. And again, everybody needs to be noodling all this information. Committee members urge you to kind of think about it, ask questions, make suggestions, and we'll be in touch very soon about our next meeting. And our goal would be to have a document before us, a bill of some sorts that we can at least consider some of these elements. And from that, we'll then begin to further negotiate on those points. So with that, we're adjourned.